Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Jedi, aka Caesar the Crowd Pleaser. And today, or this week for episode 20, we're going to be talking about the state of the format, which is Dark Frontier. That's right. We've been in this new format for a little bit. It's been getting pretty good reviews. I think people are excited to play it and still enjoying it. I know I am. I don't want to assume anything for everyone out there, but if you're listening to this podcast, probably means that you're still enjoying it as well. So yeah, why not, right? All right, so first things first, though, want to go ahead and mention our YouTube channel. This is EJthePodcast on YouTube. This is where you can get not only this podcast, but the other content that I put out from Eternal. This includes limited videos, constructed videos, sealed, and just random pack openings and stuff like that. If there are additional things that you guys suggest and would like to see on the channel, by all means, I'm open to suggestions. Shoot them my way, and I'd be more than happy to accommodate you if I can. But yeah, you can check out anything. If you are not able to catch me live, you can catch all my content there. Speaking of catching me live, every Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday mornings Central Time at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. That's right, Jedi EJ for Eternal Journey. I know, I'm so creative. So you guys can check me out there. I do primarily limited videos, but I do tournaments and constructed there as well, sometimes depending on how things are going. But definitely check it out. Love to have you in there. We can discuss draft picks, etc., etc. But all right, guys, that will do it for the intro. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our pack one, pick one. Let me go ahead and pull it up on the screen here. So in the common slots, we have Muckcrawler, the 1/1 ooze that turns into a 3/3 if you have a shifted unit. Soul Curator, the 4/4 that can only attack if you played a spell. Sizzleback Salamander, this is the 2/3 or 2/2 beast. Has Berserk, and you can twist it for 4 to deal 2 damage. We have Blurry Chaser, the 1/3 2-drop for 2 and a red with quick draw, and you can pay 1 to twist it to scout. The Horde Duelist, the 2/2 for 2 with charge. Yeti Bully, Boot Knife, and Bandit Flail, the 3/2 relic weapon for 4. Out of these commons right now, the one that stands out to me hands down is Blurry Chaser. That card has proven to outperform, especially in the aggressive decks. It's a great little threat, as well as having at least 2 scouts attached to it to help clean up your draws. At the uncommon level, we have Vizier's Tablet. Yeah, I'm not going to even go into that. We're just not playing that. Well, I guess I might as well so you guys know what it is. It is a 2-cost relic for 2 and a shadow. Pay 3 to discard the top card of the enemy deck. If it was a unit, you gain 1 life. Yeah, we're just not milling people out. It's just not a thing in this format. Moving on, we have Peak Top Trekker. This is the 2/2 Explorer for 3 primal with Overwhelm. And when you scout, Peak Top Trekker gets a +2/+2 permanently. I have yet to play with this card or play against it. I think I might have played against it once. It was kind of overwhelming. I think they turned it into a 4/4. And finally, we have Bulbous Humbug. This is a 1/2 insect for 3 and a time. It is flying, and you may twist Bulbous Humbug for 2 to draw a sigil of your choice from your deck. All right, so here we have Bulbous Humbug, which is a fellow evasive unit, and it fixes your power. And then we have Blurry Chaser, which is a solid 2-drop. I think out of the 2 of them, I would probably start with Bulbous Humbug. Reason being is it keeps us flexible. Time is a solid color to be in. And the fact they're both easily splashable. But Blurry Chaser is a little more narrow in the pathway versus Humbug. It's a flyer, so you can attack with it. And if you're able to add any more health to it in any manner, you can just draw a whole bunch of power off the top of your deck to guarantee you draw more gas. So I think right now Bulbous Humbug will be my first choice, but I would not fault you for taking the Blurry Chaser. Our rare is Quake Titan. This is a 5/1 Sentinel for 3 red. It has Shift 7, deal 5 damage to an enemy. So this card is a little interesting, and because I had it one time in my deck, I picked it up in pack 4, not pack 1, because honestly, I'm not going to take it here, I don't think, and I'll tell you why. A 5/1, think about, what is it, Oblivibot? Is that the one that was like the 5/1 that just, or 5/2 or something like that? That it just, the big attack isn't that great with not having any kind of evasion. It having 1 health means that it trades down 95% of the time when it comes to offense. On defense, you could potentially trade up, but I mean, still, it's so fragile. It can die to so many things, including coins and stuff like that, and pingers, that it's super fragile. And then shifting it for 7, I mean, you are getting essentially a free 5 damage out of it, because then, you know, you hit something, you kill either a big threat with it, or you do it to face, and then in 3 turns when it comes off of, or emerges, you get to hit for 5. But man, that is just, that's so much going on. So really, you want to play this at shift 7, and you never know if you're going to get there, especially in a red deck. So yeah, I'm not taking Quake Titan. I think maybe in pack 4, obviously I might be a little more open to taking it later, but not this early. So I am going to take Bulbous Humbug, with Blurry Chaser being a really close second. I just think Bulbous Humbug is a little more flexible of a first pick. All right, guys, with our pack 1 pick 1 out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start diving into our format breakdown. First thing I want to talk about is we recently saw some balance changes that came out. Some of them have affected constructed, while some of them did affect limited, so I think that is worth going over them. I won't go over all of them, just the ones that primarily focus on limited play, so you can see the change. So let's see, Palace was changed, and that doesn't really matter. None of these things really matter to us except for Withstand. So Withstand was modified. It used to give a +4/+4 and Aegis to a unit at fast speed. That is quite relevant. I think that is phenomenal. It makes it a great pickup because it typically eats a unit when it comes into play. And I like the fact that it protected the unit, the big guy. So your opponent needed to use 2 spells essentially, or a deadly unit or something, to take it out. Now with it switching to endurance, there are some pros and cons to this. The pro is the fact that now the big unit, you don't have to decide on whether you need to attack or leave it back as a blocker. It will do both very happily and very easily with endurance. But now if your opponent does have an eviscerate or something of that nature that could take it out, they do not have to go through an Aegis to get to it. So it does make the large unit a little more vulnerable, or significantly more vulnerable, and the potential, the risk to 2-for-1 yourself a little bit higher. Granted, there are only a handful of things that can take out a unit that hit Withstand. Almost all the red removal will not work. Gun down will work if you put it on a 1/1, but most of the time if you put it on any other unit, it will not work. So most of the time, the red removal will not work. Deadly is still a possibility of taking it out. There are a couple ways that you can give a unit deadly, or throw a deadly unit, etc. And then obviously eviscerate would be the number 1 standing. Isolate, eviscerate, things like that still have the potential to kill it, or retribution as well. So like I said, it does make the unit a little more vulnerable. It is a rare, so you're not gonna always see it, but it is good to know and something to consider. All right, next we are seeing the Adolescent Deathjaw, or a 3/2 dinosaur for 2 in a time, and nothing changes there except the shift drop down from 4 to 3, which means, and the shift says you may put an exhausted enemy unit into the owner's hand. So you get a bounce spell for 1 additional power. I think that is quite significant. It being 4 really kind of hurt this card because of the fact that getting a 3/2 for 4, it just, I don't know, it just, plus on a delay, it just didn't seem to really have the payoff you were looking for. So granted, don't get me wrong, I don't think it makes this card an absolute bomb, but it does potentially make it a little more playable. The big winner here, though, that we are seeing is the adjustment of Crooked Alley Guide. All right, this card used to be a 3/2, and now they bumped it up to a 3/3. So this card was already good, and now that it has 1 more bit of health, making it a 3/3 for 3 that scouts 1, or scouts, or you can shift it on turn 1, makes this card extremely powerful and extremely flexible. I think this is now a very high pick. It is probably the all-star when it comes to limited format, or limited that was adjusted or modified by this patch or balance changes. All right, moving right along. Next one is the Expedition leader. All right, this guy is kind of your shift payoff, so to speak. It is the 1/1 explorer at uncommon for 2 in a time. And it says when one of your units emerges, i.e. comes out of the shift stage with unblockable, draw 2 cards. And what they did for this one is they dropped it from a 3-cost unit to a 2-cost unit, but left it as a 1/1. And yeah, this card was pretty much, I don't think I saw anyone playing it before, and I still don't think anyone's going to play it. Just the fact that it's a 1/1 that does not affect the board, and like your opponent can see it coming, so they can choose, they have time to destroy it. Like it just, yeah, it's not a player. I don't see anyone playing it, so not a big change there. We will continue to move on. The next modification would be Tantrum. So Tantrum is the slow spell, 2 and a red, deal 2 damage to an enemy. Tantrum has double damage and overwhelm if you have a shifted unit. So it deals 4 damage with overwhelm. This card I think also managed to get improved. It was at 3 cost and now they dropped it down to 2. So at bare minimum, you're getting 2 damage for 2 power. I think that's fine. That is very serviceable. And the fact that you can essentially, especially if it is in Stone Scar, where you see a lot of the conscripts and the ally guide we just talked about, having this do 4 damage for 2 is quite good. It will definitely trade up, and if you're just killing a small blocker to get it out of the way, it still would, you know, bleed over overwhelm damage to the opponent's face. So I think that card has increased in playability and serviceability, so you might start seeing it a little more often as well. So those are some of the modifications. Moving right along, we have Elder Meditant. This card, I actually passed it on stream today, or actually I think I played one. This is a 2/2 Shaman at common for 4 and a blue. It has Aegis, and then you can twist it for 3 to draw a card. And pretty much all they did was add an attack to it, so now it is a 2/2 instead of a 1/2. You could still only draw 2 cards off of it, maximum, unless you have some kind of modification on it, like Flourish and stuff like that. Not going to really see a big difference in play. The decks that are going to play it regardless of its power. So yeah, I mean, I guess it does trade up. All right, the next card I believe did also see an increase in playability based on the balance changes, and this is Murderous Flock. Murderous Flock was a 3/3 bird at common for 4 and a blue, and when you scout Murderous Flock, it gets flying this turn. The only thing they did is add an additional attack, so now it's a 4/3, and I actually believe this is a significant increase in this card's playability. Reason being is you see a lot of 4 health units that initially were able to block this without problems. I think now you have stuff like the Gruon, you have stuff like Test Pilot, things like that, or even the Vorlunk, the 3/4 that can block this profitably. Now we are seeing that only the 2/5 recruit is able to block it consistently, because that extra attack will allow it to push through all these X4 units that are in the format. The fact that it is able to gain evasion is also relevant, because at a 3/3 it would have to attack your opponent 9 times before it was able to kill them, but gaining that extra attack on the front end allows it to get in 7 times now to kill your opponent, essentially shortening the clock by 2 full turns, which is quite a lot. So I do like Murderous Flock. I think it will see a little bit more play. It is also easily splashable. Once again, Primal, that we'll talk about a little bit, is one of the weaker colors, but I do think Murderous Flock will do some work. All right, guys, that was the last card I wanted to talk about. There were some buffs to a few legendaries and rare cards, but the legendaries are so few and far between and limited. I don't want to really spend too much time talking about them. And then the buffs, the other cards were 2 cards that affected the market, which is pretty inconsequential to limited. Very rarely do you ever see you don't have to worry about market cards very often. So I won't waste any more time on those, which means we get to dive into our main topic. Woohoo! All right, guys. So it's going to be pretty much just me giving you a bunch of hot takes on my opinion of the state of the format. You can take it how you see please, or how you please rather. Hopefully you're able to gain some information from this, help your drafts, help you 7-win a couple, and make your goal back so you can draft again for free. One thing I do want to mention is one of the downsides that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I am both against and for. I'm pretty neutral about this, but I did want to mention it for those of you that do not know. The way that Eternal drafts is that you are not doing a live draft. You are being passed packs that other players looked at and picked cards from, but they are not actively playing with you. Like, you are not all in the same pool. So, benefits to this are the fact that you are able to take as much time as you like, taking any picks that you like. You're also able to essentially almost, for the most part, draft any deck you want because people aren't playing against each other. The flip side to this is when a format starts to get solved or a certain opinion is being created, i.e. as of right now, thanks to general consensus, multiple articles, and then great podcasts like Farming Eternal that do meta-analysis and breakdowns, it has become pretty obvious to the majority of players that Fire is the best faction right now. And so, because we're not all drafting in the same pools, it makes it very easy for the majority of people to try to force those kinds of archetypes. And so you end up seeing them a lot more. Granted, you can... there's sometimes natural corrections for this where if other people keep drafting the counter to that, then eventually those that are forcing it have to modify, etc., etc. But in a normal draft, when you have a pod and the same people are drafting out of the same packs, then it is extremely self-correcting because let's say 8 people are drafting, right? And there's only enough cards in the pack in the packs to sustain 2, let's say, for example, Rakano drafters, right? Well, if 4 people at the table are drafting Rakano, then that means as a whole, each of their decks would be significantly less powerful than the players that are, say, drafting Xenon, because there are only 2 players that are seeking from those cards versus 4. And so you're able to get more high quality cards. So the draft format kind of corrects itself there, right? But like I said, this is only when everyone is drafting together at the same time and with the same pool, because that's not the way Eternal works. You can easily go play 7 games and have 5 or 6 out of the 7 all be busted, Rakano or Stone Scar decks, which is a little unfortunate, but it's the way the game is, and I'm still more than happy to play it. I just wanted to throw it out there for those of you that may not have experienced that or not know that. So yeah, that's it. All right, let's go into the next part, which is talking about the archetypes. So the one interesting thing is, and change from the old format, is the old both Defiance and Defiance 5.5, the archetypes were almost kind of forced a little bit. Like you really wanted to be in your lane via archetype, right? Whether it was tribal or whether you were the renowned deck or things like that. Here, I feel like in Dark Frontier, the archetypes you can draft synergies, but they're more like subtypes or suggestions for your deck. If you get that synergy, then cool, that's great, but you still just want to be drafting a really solid, well-rounded deck. Very rarely do I see decks that kind of go all into a strategy really get paid off for it. And it proves to be quite difficult in the draft, which is something I'll talk about in a moment. But let's go ahead and discuss very lightly the archetypes that I've seen. Some I've played with, some I have not. First on the list is Whose Spells Matter. So this pretty much means it is Justice Primal, and it is just a deck that has cards that care that you played spells. For example, the Sorceress that gains a +1/+1 permanently when you play a spell, or the Curator that's a 4/4 that's able to attack if you played a spell. Things like that. Trigger. I've seen some of these cards, once again, like a light suggestion in a deck, but I've not really seen someone go deep into it where they have, maybe only 12 or 13 units, but then they have a ton of spells to trigger everything and even a couple of mediocre spells. I have not seen that deck yet, and I believe it doesn't really have enough payoffs to really warrant going into it. All right. Like I said, I'm not going to dive into these too deep just because they're really not a thing. Very often you just kind of see it happen occasionally if someone has that parts of the deck or parts of those archetypes in their deck. But I, once again, have yet to come across someone that goes really deep into it. Maybe the occasional streamer that is doing it for entertainment value. I have seen some people try to make this work and seen success with it. This is Argent Port Armor Matters. That's right. So both Shadow and Justice have several relic weapons that can do some work, as well as method ways to buff the weapons. A lot of the armor you get from Justice, and then you can get a lot of modifications or reoccurrence from Shadow. The benefits to this deck is you can potentially get a decent sized relic weapon that can make it easily a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, which does help. Or the and you also get a ton of armor, which is essentially life gain tacked onto other units and spells that can incidentally make the game go a little bit longer for you and help racing situations. And then you get the occasional benefits, like for example, some of you have a fantastic 2-drop that is able to fly for no extra cost, just making sure you have armor, which typically you would have anyways. And you have the 2/2 blade barrier, I believe, that it becomes a 5/5 as long as you have armor. That card, I have seen some people kind of go off on it, but that being said, based on the board state, you may not be able to hold on to that armor, and then it goes back to being a 2/2. Of note, it does happen instantaneously, so you have the potential of losing to a combat trick. Like if you attack with 2 armor, and then they have a 3/3, you attack your 5/5, they Streets of Flame your face, your guy would become a 2/2 and then die, and the 3/3 will live. I did see on stream at some point where something happened during damage. I think they were blocking, and some of it got through to get rid of their armor, and I believe that the 2/2 is still a 5/5 until after combat and damage and everything was said and done. So that is something to take in consideration. Next up, we have Xenon Twist. This is Shadow and Gold or Time. And this deck really tries to outvalue your opponent, taking advantage of all the half, if you will. I believe certain twist cards are about half a card when you activate them. And so you're trying to pump up their health with shields and refresh and things like that, and elite. Arcanum Elite to naturally pump up your guys and get extra twist triggers out of them, and those do stack up and add up quite well. That being said, once again, you're typically only going to see somewhere between 2 to 5, I think, twist units in most of these decks, because playables are a little light, and we'll go over that a little more in depth later on. So that is another deck that I have seen some success with. Actually, one of my 7-win decks was a Xenon deck with quite a bit of twist, but I really went deep on the Xenon thing with multiple ways of things like I had one Shadow Captain to pump all my Shadow guys. I had the Siphon Life, I believe, that gives all your guys a +1/+1, all their guys a -1/-1, and then a Behemoth, 2 Blood Nurses, and 2 Razor Quills. So all that stuff kind of coming together made that deck pretty. Oh, and 2 Horn of Plenty. So the deck really kind of went deep in there without me trying to. And that deck did perform. So you get so much incidental value, and twist allows you to be flexible on the size of your units. So if you need them to defend, you twist less. If you're able to go on the offensive, you twist more. So that deck's pretty solid. And then these two are kind of sub themes. I really don't think they are standout. This is the kind of deck you want to be in. The first one is a Scout sub theme, primarily in a fire deck. You can do this. There's a little bit of scouting in pretty much every faction, but you get the biggest payoffs in fire. One card of note is the Barracks. I think Barbarian Barracks. Let me look it up real quick. That card is, I've only been able to use it once, really, because I honestly don't pick it very highly or play it, because I do think it is slow. Clan Barracks. This is the 7-cost relic at uncommon for 7 in fire. And when you scout, play a 4/4 warrior. Onslaught trigger, you scout. So if you're able to attack that turn, you automatically get a 4/4. The fact that you get a 4/4 makes it kind of easy to trigger Onslaught, because you just trade up. You attack with your 2/2 or your 1/2 or something like that. They block and kill it, and then you get a 4/4 for your troubles. I think this card is extremely slow. The deck I played it in and ended up doing the combo is in Praxis, i.e. Time Fire, with a Cryptic Etchings. And I literally was and I had a Horn of Plenty out. So I was, for 2 power to scout, I was making a 5/5 every turn. I did win that game, needless to say, but that was about the only time that I really had the desire to play the Clan Barracks. So that's one of the big payoffs, but obviously other cards, they're like when you scout XYZ happens. That is a thing, but once again, because scout is just so beneficial across the board, it's not really something that you need to like, yes, I'm gonna make this deck. Like it just kind of happens naturally because everyone wants some form of scout in their deck because it's just oh so useful. The next sub theme is the warp and shift matters cards. So same thing, you guys are just gonna see a couple of cards that we talked about like in our pack one pick one, that hey, if a unit is shifted, this happens. If a unit emerges, this happens. Once again, it's not like you're gonna sit there and be like, oh, this unit has shift, I'm gonna take it over something else. Once again, your deck just kind of incidentally ends up getting some shift cards. It's really the payoffs are the ones you want to focus on, and sometimes, like for example, the warp payoff where all your warp and shift costs are one less is still a 2/3 for 3, which is a completely serviceable body. And so you would end up taking it anyway. So when these kind of things come together, I think warp in a more aggressive red deck could be a thing. You know, that's why people take Blink Wolf quite highly. Not highly, but higher than a regular 2/1 would, just because of the fact that if it is sitting on the top of your deck, you can pay 2 power to draw a card. So to play a 2/1 and draw a card, you know. So there is some value into the warp, but yeah. Once again, they're not really things that you're going to super focus like, oh yeah guys, we're doing it, we're the warp deck. Like that's not really a thing, especially in limited when you don't have access to unlimited power where you just continue to play stuff. But yeah, those are the those are the suggested archetypes in Dark Frontier. So yeah, if you guys draft them, sweet. If not, then no worries. Always going to your fundamentals and just having a well-rounded curve always helps win the games. So one thing I want to go ahead and mention is the elephant in the room. Heretics Cannon is busted. If you see a cannon, draft a cannon. It is a +2/+2 weapon at uncommon for 6 and a red. It has overwhelm, and the wielder attacks. When the wielder attacks, double its attack this turn. This card is absolutely busted. It wins games. I cannot tell you how many times I have either played with it, played against it, or seen it on stream where someone is playing a fair game or someone is ahead and then this hits the field and the game is just over. This card is absolutely bonkers, especially if you can put it on either a ginormous unit like in time or some kind of evasive unit like in Justice. You could just start wrecking havoc with it. And because it's only one fire, I've seen plenty of people splash for it, and I think it is 100% correct to do. So yeah, Heretics Cannon. I'm sure plenty of people hate it. I think it's okay. It is uncommon, so there is some check. I did draft a deck with 3 of them. Somehow I got lucky, and a person that was passing me just didn't value it. Thank goodness. Or they were, because I think anybody, and I hate to say this because, you know, I want to see some pass to me, but yeah, if you see a Heretics Cannon, you draft it, and there's a 90% chance that you play it. There's going to be some 10% chances in certain decks that you're not going to want to splash for it, but the fact that it's a 6-drop, like, you have time to get your 1 fire. All right, that's the one elephant in the room. Let's go ahead and move on to our next part, which is standout uncommons. That's right. These are cards that I have seen that I feel like I've picked one for each faction that I feel like really outdo themselves, outperform, that you are going to pick to essentially lean you into that faction to play because they're just solid cards. And so we'll go ahead and start with fire, since that is the most popular one. And plus, if you're seeing this on YouTube, I have a foil one, and this is Combustion Brawler. This is a 6/4 uncommon elemental for 5 red. It has overwhelm, and the enemy player can't gain health. That's right. It stops them from healing, which it does not stop armor, but it does stop healing. And there is quite a bit of lifesteal in this format, especially in the Argenport faction combination. It also has shift 4, exhaust an enemy unit. That's right. So this card is extremely versatile and extremely effective in the deck that wants it. I have lost, sometimes I have single-handedly lost this card, and sometimes I have won off the back of this card. Combustion Brawler is fantastic. It is double fire, so you definitely want to be a fire deck to play it. But you will be surprised how often that cannot gain life thing comes into play. And the fact that you're able to exhaust something the turn it comes into play, get him for extra damage, they can't heal from that extra damage they took, and then in 3 turns, you're going to be able to jam in for 6 with this guy. And then the turn after, jam again with it being 6 power with Overwhelm. Yeah, this card is a closer. It is absolutely fantastic. I definitely like it. It is performed on both sides of the table against and for me. Next up, we have, for time, we have Blurred Stiggy Moloch. I just call him Stiggy. So this is a 7/6 dinosaur at uncommon for 10 in time. I have hard casted this guy, but there's some additional text. He has Overwhelm, which is always nice on a large unit. You definitely want that Overwhelm to help prevent chump blocking. And then Blurred Stiggy costs 7 less, i.e. 3, if you have 7 attack or more among your units on the battlefield. So what this means is if you have 7 attack worth of units on the battlefield or on the board, you are able to play Stiggy for 3. That is pretty much your goal. That is what you're looking to do. You are not looking to play this guy on 7 or at 10. You are looking to play him on 3. And you would be surprised how often you are able to do this between twist units, between aggressive costed 3/3s and things like that. You are actually able to get him out on turn 4 fairly consistent in most decks, believe it or not, especially if you're not playing the removal game and trading off aggressively with your opponent. This card, because it has the potential of coming down so early, has the potential of stealing the game because it gets in for so much damage. And then if you are on the back foot, it will stop your opponent's offense very, very quickly. So yeah, Stiggy has done some serious work. I think this card is fantastic. It being a single time means it is kind of a safe early pick as well because it's easily splashable, and if not, like, so be it. But yeah, Stiggy is solid. Moving right along to Justice, we have Valkyrie Accuser. This card was in close contention with the 4/4 flying endurance Valkyrie, but this one takes the case for 2 reasons, and I'll go over it. First, it is a 3/5 flyer for 7 Justice. So yeah, 7 is a lot. But let me tell you something. If you get there, this card is worth it. So a 3/5 flyer is fantastic. It's very hard to kill it, and it's very hard to block effectively against it, and it does attack. But here's the thing. It also has Aegis. That's right. You guys remember what I said earlier about what made withstand so well? This Aegis is solid. It gives you a little bit of insurance for playing a 7 drop because there's very minimal chance of it dying the turn after you play it, because of the simple fact that, your opponent either A, at 7 means they might have exhausted some of their removal spells already, or B, the fact that they're not going to have 2 to get rid of it. I've been on the receiving end of several losses from this card because of the fact that there's just no way to kill it effectively. So, but the text continues on. Onslaught, play Timidity on an enemy unit. Timidity, the cursed unit can't attack. That's right. It has a removal spell attached to it, or pseudo removal. One of the games I lost with this card, I had a very aggressive, what did I have? I had something big. I don't remember. It wasn't a behemoth. It was something else. Maybe it was a Stiggy with something attached to it. But I was literally like, cool, all right, time to pound somebody's face in. And they literally played this Accuser and shut down my guy. And then it was a huge ground unit, so the Accuser was still able to attack. And I never had access to 2 removal spells for it. I think I died with an Isolate and then like a Downfall in my hand. So Downfall obviously couldn't hit it, and I could hit the Aegis with the Isolate, but there was no point in breaking the Isolate or the Aegis until I got a second removal spell. So yeah, this card just does some serious work. I think it's fantastic, and the fact that it has resilience and a removal spell attached to it is why I put it over the 4/4 Angel or Valkyrie, even though it does come down sooner and can get in there for a little more damage. Next up for Primal, we have Avalanche Yeti. This is on the surface a 2/2 Yeti for 2 in a Primal. But here's the payoff. It has Shift 6. Wait, what, 6? Well, the text is what makes up for it. And there's a reason why it's Shift 6. Shift 6 stun 2 enemy units they stay stunned until Avalanche Yeti emerges. That's right. So they're stunned for 3 turns. You are taking 2 units out of the board or off the game, off the board for 3 turns. Mind you, Avalanche Yeti is staying shifted, so they can't target it either. Yeah, this card wins games. It is really, really good. Some people I've seen splash it because of the fact that it's a 6-drop. So much like the cannon, you can wait to get that single primal to splash it. And worst case scenario, if you are in the primal deck and you need to make some plays, it's a 2/2 for 2. So you're perfectly happy with the floor of it as well. So yeah, Avalanche Yeti is a solid pick. Once again, since primal is typically one of the lesser colors, which we'll talk about a little bit later, thanks to some other research and other great podcasts, the Yeti is a low. Our primal is typically a splash card or a support card versus a primary. And the final, going into shadow, the final uncommon that I think is strong is actually going to be Spiteful Strike. This is a fast spell for 1 in a shadow. Give a unit +2/+1, lifesteal, and quick draw this turn. So the reason why I like Spiteful Strike over, notice how all the other ones were a unit and this one is not. And the reason being is Spiteful Strike is absolutely amazing at changing a race, combat math, and is extremely difficult to play around. Reason being is it's only 1. It only costs 1. You know how easy it is to keep 1 up? Like you can even play a unit pre-combat and attack and your opponent still might not play around it. And the fact that it's quick draw and lifesteal and gives you 2 additional attack means that 99% of the time this is going to eat a unit and gain you some serious amount of life and still keep your unit around. The bigger the unit, the better the payoff, but it works just fine with smaller units as well. For example, a 3/3, let's say our alley guide, it's going to kill up to a 5/5 and gain you 5 life. That negates a whole enemy attack. Yeah, this card is really good. I like it. I think it's a solid pick. And the honorable mention would be a unit which is Umbran Voidbringer. And the reason being is it is a 2/2 Radiant for 4 Shadow. It has Flying, it has Berserk, which combos really well with Spiteful Strike with the Berserk, and it has Onslaught, draw a unit from your Void. So it has a, it's not Dark Return, it's the other one that brings it back. Granted, it doesn't gain Void Bound, so you can easily combo these off and just keep getting the 2 of them back. But the additional benefits to this card is the fact that you can attack with a big unit, they double or triple block to get it off, you kill 2 things, then you play Voidbringer and get it right back. Like the unit that died could essentially trigger the onslaught from Voidbringer. Or once again, you just send in a 1/1 or a 2/2, they may or may not block it, and then you get your best unit back and you have a flying 2/2 on the board ready to get pumped and swing in. So yeah, Voidbringer and Spiteful Strike. But like I said, Spiteful Strike just seems like a way bigger blowout. So those are my hot standout uncommons for the set. I think they are cards that you should value highly when you are drafting, and they could potentially pull you into specific colors. All right, guys, the last thing I want to talk about today is going to be some format hot takes, or my little snippets of information to kind of help you on what I feel the format is at. First thing, if I can borrow a little bit of statistics from Farming Eternal, want to go ahead and just mention that we were right. Fire is still the most popular and successful faction of the format, and Primal is the least effective in the format. Just a quick little snippet there for you guys. I think everyone that has been drafting typically has picked up on that on their own just because of what you've been playing against more often than not and how the decks feel. I drafted an Elysian deck earlier today, and granted, I will admit that my bottom end of the curve just wasn't there because I got kind of cut pack 2, but it's still just, yeah, it just felt a little underwhelming even with a heavier time shift. But yeah, something to throw out there because the uncommons for Primal are quite powerful, but it seems like it lacks very much on the common side of it. I think that's where the deck suffers, but that doesn't mean don't play it. If it's open, it's open, and you can still get some solid cards. It's just, you know, once again, a representation of it in their 7-win deck list. Some next thing I want to mention is on, speaking of no bottom end or early game today, is there are less playables in this format. For some reason, in the last formats, I felt like we were like really constantly making cuts. And nowadays I at least feel like it's making 1 or 2 cuts, if cuts at all. There have been plenty of drafts where I get to the deck part and I'm like, cool, add power. And next thing I know, I need to either cut 1 card or add a card, or like the deck's done. So yeah, that means there are less playables. So you really want to be considerate of that and try to take the best card for your deck that you can when you can. I would still suggest staying as open as you can in pack 1, just because, or at least halfway through pack 1, taking the best cards that you can, and then somewhere about half to 3/4 or even at the start of pack 2, figure out what your primary color or your secondary color is going to be, instead of locking yourself into a 2-faction thing pretty early. Because once again, you may not see that in packs 2 and 3. That also leads into the fact that you'll see less cards for your market. So if you do pick up a smuggler, realize that your market might not be as impressive as you think it might. Like, in fact, I believe one of the drafts where I picked up a merchant or a smuggler, I ended up having only 2 cards in the market. And they weren't very impressive either. Like, they were better than a sigil, and that was about it, versus like the draft I did earlier today. Rakano was very much open, and I was able to kind of pick an early threat, a late threat, a ruin, removal spell, little things like that. So it also makes insignias a little bit higher in value as well if you end up picking up a smuggler, just because then that's a little bit of fixing, because your black markets cannot hold sigils, so just keep that in mind. Also, there are less reasons to splash. The fixing is not as good, and you're just so incentivized to go into 2 colors because there's less cards that kind of bleed over into multiple factions, less powerful cards in the top end that you want to really be like, oh no, I want to switch to this. So you still do see 3-color decks, but more often than not, I see the majority of people sticking to 2 colors and kind of really solidifying that. Because honestly, you have to remember that as you start adding more and more colors to your deck, you are kind of making your power base a little more unstable. Even with fixing, you never know. There have been times where I've literally had 3 sources of splash color, and my opening hand had all 3 sources in it, or I had 2 and then drew the 3rd. So just keep that in consideration. For the most part, like I said, unless you get something like Heretic Cannon power level or a really strong legendary, splashes really aren't incentivized in this format as they were in the previous one, where 3 colors were a lot stronger. Another thing I like to mention is that remember that in the late game, any unit that has shift increases in value because you can get in incidental free damage. So even, for example, a devotee, right? A devotee of the sands, you see that late game, like turn 8 or 9, it's still worth shifting it unless you absolutely need a blocker, because you will be able to get in 1 damage when it comes out. The same goes for 2 3s and 3 3s. I mean, obviously the bigger units, unless you need them for a blocker, like that's one of the things that makes Tremor Shaker, right? I think that's what, let me double check. I always forget. I think it's Tremor Shocker. Anywho, that's what makes that card so powerful. Tremor Shocker, okay, yeah. It is that in the late game, if you do not need the body down right away, shifting it guarantees, especially in a stalled board state, shifting it means you're gonna get in for 6 and your opponent can't do anything about it unless they leave up something like an isolate. So shifting units late game is very powerful still. In fact, it's not only cheating on their cost, but doing it late game even when you don't need to can really help you get in incidental damage that helps you win races or breaks parity and things like that. So keep that in mind when you're seeing these units late game and stuff like that, regardless of the size. Once again, unless you absolutely need the block or you have the way to push through damage the next turn, so you don't want to wait for the shift. All right, one thing I do want to mention is the fact, as I stated earlier, that fire is the most popular faction and the most popular or most played, means that in every draft, you have to take into consideration the fun police. You will, if you go deep into a draft, you're going to play at least 2 aggressive decks in your streak to 7 wins. So looking at your deck, you really want to make sure that you have some 2 drops and 3 or early game interaction. to make sure that you don't just simply get ran over by these aggressive decks. They're primarily going to be either Rakano or actually, I guess they'll be all the factions, believe it or not, because I've seen him played Praxis, I've seen him played Stone Scar, I've seen him played obviously Rakano. Rakano is the most popular faction, with Fire being the most popular, Justice being the second most popular faction, and they combo off together very well. But yeah, so you definitely have to take that into consideration. You need some top end. You want to be going bigger than these decks so you can stabilize, but there is going to be the opportunities or times where you just get ran over if you have too slow of a start. So always make sure you take that into consideration when drafting and deck building. Also, another little snidbit on Fire, that I am high on Daring Maneuver. I like the card. I think the fact that it is flexible both on offense and defense, as well as giving the unit overwhelm, makes it a great addition to any red deck. I value them not super high, but higher than most. I typically end up with at least 2 in my red decks because I value them. I like it more than Pummel. Pummel being 1 less and offering Scout is a decent adjustment, but the fact that you can only do it on attackers has its pluses and minuses as well. But that's a thing. And then another little snippet that is my own personal taste. I think the removal in the set is very good right now. Every piece of removal you want, you'll play it. I think Eviscerate might be the only one that you want to have a cap on, just because the fact that it costs 5. But pretty much every other removal spot in the game you'd play. And just to touch on Fire again, I am higher on Streets of Flame than I am Char. Once again, 3 power is definitely not 1. There is flexibility there, but I think the difference comes with there being a lot of relevant 3 power units or 3 health units that need killing, or the fact that it kind of helps you play around certain combat tricks and you can use it a little more proactive. It has Scout attached to it, so in a more aggressive deck, you can get rid of a blocker while also guaranteeing that you're going to hit your next power drop or bottom your power if you need something else. So yeah, I do like Streets of Flames a little more than Char. So 9 out of 10 times if I see the 2 in the pack, I'm going to take the Streets of Flame instead of the Char. Though I do think it is close, and I could see you arguing for either or. Lastly, twist units are pretty strong. There are very few twist units that I am not perfectly okay twisting. Like I said, every unit, Blurry Chaser, Razor Quill, Behemoth, all these cards, Test Pilot, all these cards give you incremental value when you twist them. And the fact that they upgrade to essentially a unit that could either trade up or just get in there and kill your opponent really makes a difference, and it allows them to give you a little bit of reach. Street Urchin draws you cards. You know, I've won games. The Xenon deck I had, I've won games with the Captain and then the Blood Nurse making like 3 bats and then giving them all +1/+1. So the twist units are stronger than they seem. Now, granted, they still are in context. There's sometimes where opponent plays a twist unit and you really don't care what it does, but that is something to consider, is the fact that they do gain incremental value, especially if they're able to essentially allow them to twist more. That's when the cards really become broken. When you are able to slap, like for example, Shield on a Razor Quill and then it drains for 7 total, like that's a 14-point life swing. That is absolutely nuts. Same thing with Blurry Chaser. You know, you throw a refresh or something like that on it, and all of a sudden it becomes, you know, a 6-2 or wait 3 a 5-1, yeah, 5-1 6-1 quick draw, and you scouted a bunch. Yeah, like there's some damage to be dealt there and stuff, so definitely keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that there's plenty of ways to ping your opponent and ping units, to include the coins, which we'll talk about in a second. So yeah, so sometimes you might not want to shift the unit, twist the unit all the way down to 1. Sometimes you want to keep it at 2, whether, you know, shock is also in the format, so that's something else to consider when you're going up against red being the most popular color, is you shift the unit down to 2 and then they just shock it or char it. So there are some pros and cons to all things, just something to keep in mind. I think that is a cool little sub game that you see I myself held onto a fire coin for 2 turns today, waiting for my opponent to shift or twist. I don't know why I keep saying twist or shift. Jeez, need more caffeine. Waiting for my opponent to twist their Blurry Chaser a second time to put it at 1 health so I can ping it with the coin. So that is something to consider. But yeah, twist I think is a super fun mechanic. I'm enjoying it. I hope you guys are as well. All right, going into our power base. 2 things. First, coins are great. They are awesome. I once again am not on the bus or the train to splash them on off colors. So i.e. like if I am Rakano putting in the primal coin, I have not done that yet. I have come across it and I do think there is some value there, but once again, I like my power base to be extremely consistent. So I've personally just have not done it. I don't think I will either, regardless of how powerful the coin might be in my deck. But you are getting a free spell off of power, and typically you can find a spot in your curve to play them as far as the depleted part goes. Sometimes that is a cost that you have to consider, especially if you're an aggressive deck. Sometimes you just have to play your coin on turn 1 for no value, and other times you can find a spot in your curve if you have a low to the curve or a low to the ground power curve. Next up, which is not in Dark Frontier but is in the format, are the standards. The standards are like the coins, but even better personally, I think, because they're all kind of busted. Like, I think the weakest one of them is the Temple standard, which is the time one. It puts a unit and all the weapons on it back into their hand. But overall, they are all really solid because it's giving you a really important spell after you have 5 power. So, which isn't horrible. Like, they transmute at 5, and if you have it in your hand, you can make the decision on whether you want to play them early to make sure you get that power, or you just wait till you hit your 5th power for it to transmute on its own. Obviously, when you get it late game, it's going to transmute on its own regardless, but you still have a little bit of play to it if you need to. But the fact that they're all extremely powerful, like they all are removal spells in their own right, and I think that makes them extremely powerful. That's why the Temple standard is the weakest one to me, because it's the only one that essentially doesn't allow you to kill a unit. It's a huge tempo play. But Shugo standard gives you a +4/+4, and Overwhelm. Crown Watch gives you +3/+3 in lifesteal, which is a blowout because of the life swing. Clan standard gives you the 5 damage to an attacking enemy unit, to include a player. Yes, there have been plenty of times where people have tried to attack one of my units with their relic weapon, and then you clan tactic them to break their relic weapon or kill them. So yeah, that's something to consider. And then Cabal standard, it gives 2 of your attacking units quick draw, or well, 2 of your units quick draw and +2/+0. So you can use it on defense as well, which is relevant. But yeah, doing this on combat when you're attacking can sometimes just be an utter blowout. So I think the standards are absolutely amazing. If they're in your color, just take them. Like, anytime you're able to add a spell to your deck without taking up a card slot, you're taking up a power slot, then it's awesome because it's power early, so you're not diluting your power base. But later in the game when you don't need it, it's a card that you do need and it is relevant. So take that into consideration. But that's going to do it. That's all I have for my format hot takes. Nothing really outside the box super spectacular I have played, but like I said, nothing has really stood out to me other than what we already know. All the cycle of shift units to give an ability to another unit while they're shifted, those are all great. +3/+3, death, deadly, double damage, flying, all those cards are great. They're absolutely amazing because they force one of your other units to become a threat. So your opponent has to decide on whether they're going to deal with that threat and burn removal or a combat trick, or units double blocking on it, or if they're just going to deal with it and then wait the 3 turns for the initial unit to emerge and then deal with that. But either way, they're great value. I like them quite a bit. I think they do some serious work. For example, today I did combo off the Belligerent Yeti with the time one that gives deadly, and I was able to ping units with deadly and kill them. So there, and then obviously if you have something like a behemoth on the ground and you're in a legion, you can use that version of the cycle to give the behemoth flying and get in there. Like, they're all just really good. they're all really good. So I like those, and they're solid just playing them on a curve as well. So I think the diversity of those units and the flexibility of them makes them even more efficient and effective. So value those guys highly as well if they're in your colors. All right, guys, that is going to do it, which means we're going into our What's the Play segment, the newest segment added to the podcast. So I hope you like it. Let me know in the comments below if you do. So this one's a little interesting. I felt like you had to really map out your next 3 turns to make the correct play here. As we did last time, I will explain the board state the best I can, and then tell you, or actually give you a little bit of time here in podcast land, or you could just hit pause to mull it over yourself, come up with a conclusion, let me know, then I will let you know what I did, and then also let you know how the game played out. So it is my turn 3. We are on the draw. We just played our 3rd power. We are Praxis. We're both players are at 25 life. Our opponent has 5 cards in hand. We have 6. They have the 3/4 conscript shifted with next turn it emerging, and then the 2/2 double damage guy in play unshifted or just standard. We have the 0/3 flying scout guy on the board. We have 3 undepleted power, and our hand consists of Bulbous Humbug, the 1/2 twist 2 to go get a sigil, the 2/2 machete with scout for 3, the 4/3 scorpion that you can shift for 3 to give another unit deadly, the Avalanche familiar, the 1/2 flyer for 3 that gives you +1 maximum power, daring maneuver, the +2/+2 at fast speed, and then the 3/4 Vorlunk at 4, right? So the decision I came across is whether I A, play the Bulbous Humbug, B, play the familiar, or C, play the machete, scout, play the machete on the 0/3, making it a 2/5 and scouting, or D, leaving up daring maneuver to attempt to block the 2/2 double damage and get it off the board. So, what's the play? Do 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 do. I might edit something in there. Not sure yet. Alrighty, so hopefully you can see this on YouTube. You should be able to. Yeah, it looks like you can see it. So, fast forwarding a little bit, I decided to play the familiar. And my reasoning behind this is that I definitely didn't want to get stuck on power, especially with our opponent playing Rakano. And it would be a death sentence if we fall behind on power. So I had the decision. And I typically don't like, unless I have to play to a specific out, I like to play the more conservative way. That's just the way I prefer it. So the choice was either Bulbous Humbug or Familiar. So using the daring maneuver was out of the question because, one, it would have not helped us get any kind of power, and the chances of them using some kind of trick to kill our 0/3 or pump their guy, etc., just put us in a really bad spot, essentially wasting our turn. So it was between the Bulbous Humbug and the Familiar. And for me, if I played the Humbug this turn, I would have to, next turn, play twist the Humbug to go get a power, play the power, and that would leave us at 4 power for the turn, right? And then we have a chance of it dying, or we would at least have the daring maneuver up, but I probably wouldn't block. Not really sure, but I felt like it was a little too slow. So I ended up, or wait, does it play it depleted? I can't remember. Let me look it up real quick. I want to make sure I'm giving you guys accurate information. Draw it. Yeah, okay, I'm correct. You will draw it. So it doesn't play depleted. Okay, just wanted to make sure. So I ended up playing the Familiar because I felt like that would guarantee us 4 power. And then if we drew our 5th power, then we would be able to play the Humbug and then twist it in the same turn. Or we could also play the Vorlunk next turn as well. So that was my reasoning. Like, I could either humbug if we drew power, and if not, then I would just be able to Vorlunk. That would give us a 3/4 blocker that essentially can slow down our opponent's aggression, right? So that's what I did. My opponent then proceeded to... All right, so let's see what happened. So they attacked as we predicted, and I put the 0-3 in front of their double damage guy just to avoid any kind of potential blowouts with pump spells and things like that. I just didn't want to take a ton of damage this turn. They followed it up with a onslaughted 3/3, the Faithful, and then we top decked another Vorlunk, because I believe this deck had 3, and then a Blink Wolf was warped on top. I ended up... Let me see. Let me make sure I'm watching the video to make sure I'm accurate with you guys. All right, what else? So we ended up taking the Blink Wolf off the top. That was the other play that I had to decide on was, okay, do we Bulbous now or Humbug now? And then once again, that was the awkward thing. The fact that what was preventing me from humbugging was the fact that we didn't have enough power to play it and then twist it on the same turn. So I didn't want our opponent seeing us short on power to kill it in response, and then we're just stuck. And or yeah, it's just dying. So I wanted to take the Warp Wolf off the top to essentially draw a card, bring us a little bit closer to potentially drawing power, and then it would still allow me to leave up Daring Maneuver to block one of their guys and pump it. So long story short, we ended up never getting another power and not really seeing a good window to humbug. I think I ended up bringing up the Warp Wolf, yeah, or the Vorlunk, yeah. So we did take their something off the board, I forgot. Anywho, long story short, we ended up losing this game because we just got stuck on 4 power. Eventually, I had to block the double damage guy with our familiar so we wouldn't die, because I think they ended up pumping it and we lost. But that was the biggest thing. I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was an interesting discussion point where you have 4 different kinds of paths that are strategically different. So let me know in the comments below where you fell through. What did you fall on you thought the play was, and seeing what happened if you thought your play was correct or not. In hindsight, obviously, I think I should have then instead played the humbug, just taken the hit initially, taken a turn off to guarantee we at least got 1 to 2 power drops from the draw. Even if it was a little bit slower, it would have paid off more in the long run. We had also had the machete in hand, so I could have played it and then gone, done the whole twist thing, gotten 1, and then before I twisted it a second time, I could have put the machete on it to draw more. So yeah, I think the correct play, my play was not the correct play. I think the correct line would have been the humbug, even though a little bit slower, it would have increased our chances of drawing power and then maybe being in the game, since we died with so much gas in our hands. But all right, guys, that is the what's the play. Let me know if you guys like it, if it's something you want me to keep doing. Some of them I feel like are going to be more interesting than others. I do have one from today, which is kind of a little preemptive, what do you want to play around, which I'll bring up in the next podcast, unless something better comes up. I try to pick the most interesting ones with the most different lines of play. But yeah, let me know if you guys like this. I will continue to do it. If you don't like it, then I might get rid of it and try to add some other thing I can do on a week to week. But that is going to do it for me, guys. I really appreciate you tuning in. You, as always, can catch me on Twitter and YouTube at EJthePodcast. Make sure you're throwing me a follow on Twitter. I post whenever I go live on Twitch. I'll talk about in a minute, as well as when new videos are up and just discussion points. I post my 7-win decks there, as well as any interesting pack one pick ones for you guys. So yeah, tune in. And then YouTube, you can find all my content, both limited, constructed, as well as this podcast there, to include the video version. So check it out there if you want to see my content offline. And if you want to catch me live, you can do that at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday mornings I stream. Primarily limited, but I do constructed in some tournament plays. And then if you guys are interested in following my real life stuff, my Instagram is CaesarLeBear7, where I do my fire performing, my circus, my shows, post some cosplay stuff, all that goodness. So you guys can check that out there. All right, that will do it for today. If you guys want to message me personally, you can message me on EJthePodcast@gmail.com, and that's a little offline versus posting in the comments below. If you're listening to this on iTunes or SoundCloud, by all means, like, share, and leave a rating. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. I hope this podcast helps you become a little bit better at drafting, because heaven knows I'm still trying to. Luckily, we're still above the 50% win rate, so we are doing good. But all right, guys, until next time, happy gaming.